Hi everyone, this is Yannick of 961 Minutes. In today's tutorial we'll be looking at the stamp tool in Photoshop and how we can remove things from a picture or clone them. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to open this picture, and in some cases you'll want to maybe clone a subject in your picture or remove it completely from your picture, and that's where the stamp tool is actually quite handy. We'll also take a look at the content aware fill feature in Photoshop. Okay, so let's get started. This is a picture I took. I actually like having this little beetle in this picture, but for the sake of the tutorial we'll try to play around with the stamp tool to clone it and remove it completely. Okay, so the stamp tool is found on the left hand side panel in Photoshop, where you can find most of your tools. It's this one over here, so you can click on it. When you click on the stamp tool, you get what I call a contextual menu. The contextual menu is basically, it changes depending on what tool you're using. So for instance, if I use the brush tool, I have different settings than if I use the stamp tool. The settings you'll be needing for the stamp tool to work properly are basically the brush element, the brush setting, which allows you to change the size and hardness of your brush. We'll cover this in another video if you're not familiar with brush settings. It's very simple actually. The second thing you'll be using a lot is the opacity setting in the stamp tool. The opacity is pretty straightforward. It allows you to change the density of your brush strokes if you want. So for instance, if you set it to 10%, it's going to make a small change. It's going to be quite transparent. If you use 100%, it's going to be very opaque. Okay, and you can also use, we'll be looking at the aligned checkbox here as well. So we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, so let's get started. Let's say you want to clone an element of your picture. You'll choose the stamp tool, click on it, and the two things you need to remember is if you hold down the Alt key, it allows you to target an area of your picture that you want to clone. So for instance, if we want to clone the beetle, we'll need to target the beetle. But right now my brush size doesn't encompass the whole subject we want to clone, so the first thing I need to do is actually change the size of my brush. So let's go a little bit overboard. This is still a little bit too small. Okay, let's make it 200. Okay, now we have the whole beetle in my circle, in my brush. So when I target, holding down the Alt key, when I target it, it's going to basically sample the whole area in the circle here. Okay, so once I've targeted it, you can see that when I move my brush, it's showing me a preview of what it would do if I was to click on my left click on the mouse. So let's say for instance we want to duplicate it here, so I'm going to press once. Okay, so if I remove it, you can see that it's hardly visible. You have a little bit of a silhouette here, but that's only because I've used 10% opacity, meaning that every brush stroke is 10% transparency, if you will. So let's push this to 100% now. And 100%, I click once, and there we go. It's still not 100% opaque. That's probably due to the softness of my brush. Basically the softness is just how sharp your edges will be. So if you have a very hard brush, that means that your edges will be completely sharp, as you can see here, as opposed to very soft here. Okay, so you can see the edges are feathered. Okay, Apple Z sorry, Command Z to come back. Okay, and okay, so 100%, still a soft brush, and we can duplicate our subject here. Okay, as you can see, this used a little bit of the pedal, the white pedal that's here as well. So we'll need to correct that using the stamp tool, just sampling a little bit of this area and removing it. But that's basically how you clone something using the stamp tool. Now if I come back, I will get back to here, and now we want to maybe remove something from a picture using the stamp tool. So it's basically the same logic, but what we will want to do is basically to sample what's around the beetle and brush over our beetle. Okay, so one thing I didn't mention at the beginning of this tutorial is that it's always better to work on a second layer. So you can duplicate your layer holding Command J, and that's going to make a duplicate of your layer, so you can work on this one and still have the original at hand underneath. Okay, so using the stamp tool, we are going to make our brush much smaller because we will need to replicate the light and colors like they would be underneath the beetle. So that's the challenge. Okay, let's move it to this much, and we can start holding down the Alt key, sample this area, and now when we brush, you can see that it's using this area and replicating it where we brush. One thing that you'll notice is that when I hold down my key, my sampling area moves with it, which can be sometimes a little bit funny looking. So if you want to make sure that your sampling area stays always at the same place, you can remove the aligned checkbox, and then you'll need to click only once. You can't drag it. If you drag it, it's always going to move, but you can click once and it's going to just keep the same area. If I was to check this box, even if I click only once, if I made clicks, it's going to move and sample an area that is always the same depending on my brush area, if you will. It's always going to stay next to it. Okay, so I'm going to come back a lot because this is a very bad job. Okay, like so. And now the challenge would be to actually resample all the time, so we can make sure, sample here, we can make sure that the colors of the pedal underneath are respected and that it doesn't look funny when we're done. So sampling here, brushing, sample, brush, sample, brush, etc., etc. So that can be a quite lengthy process. It's definitely not the quickest way to do it, and that's what we are going to see now. I'm going to delete this layer so I have my initial layer still backed up, and do Command J to duplicate it again so I can work on this layer now. One of the features that Photoshop offers, which is really interesting, is the content aware fill tool. This is how it works. So you make a selection first. So I'm going to use the lasso tool to surround my beetle with the selection. Okay, like so. We'll cover the selection tools in another video, but it's pretty straightforward. I think it's a very generic feature. It works the same in Paint, in different drawing applications. So now I have a selection around the beetle, and that means that nothing outside of the area will be affected. And now what I can do is actually just say Edit, Fill, and here it it offers a few different algorithms or ways to fill the area, but we're interested in the content-aware fill, which is basically going to analyze what's around your picture and try to guess what's supposed to be here to complete it. So here you don't really need to mess around with the settings, you can just press OK, and there you go. When you deselect, it did a really good job just removing it, and that takes about 3 seconds from duplicating our layer, selecting, choosing edit, fill, content aware fill, and here it's not available because we didn't make a selection. Press OK, and that's it. It removed it, and it's really seamless. Okay, but it has some limitations, and let's see with a different picture now. Take this picture, say open with Photoshop. Okay, this is another picture I took. Here, one thing I wanted to do is to remove all the people in the photo and the ski pole thingies. So that's where you will see the limitation of the content-aware fill. So I'm going to use a different selection tool, which is polygon lasso tool, which is much easier to use when you're working with straight edges. So I'm just going to select this, zoom in a little bit. Sorry. Whoa. Okay, there we go. Trying to go quite wide. Okay, so now I've selected this. If I say edit, fill, content aware, say OK, now you can see the real limitations. Photoshop analyzed what was around my area, and it thought that I wanted to fill this area with this part of the picture, which is completely wrong. This doesn't look right at all. So this is where Photoshop is struggling to guess what's supposed to be in the area to be filled. So I'm going to press Command Z to come back twice, and this is where you would need to actually use the stamp tool and do it manually, because it gives you more control. It's much more time consuming, but you have more control with it. So just like we did earlier, use the stamp tool, sample an area next to our area as close as possible, so we make sure that the color is right, looks right, and then I can start just brushing like this, resample a little bit here, and we can see it starts removing the subject. Okay. Like so. And it does a pretty good job, especially when you have a background that is easy to guess, to replicate, because that's basically one color with very little variations. It's not a very complex background, so that's very handy. Let's finish quickly. Not gonna do a great job. It's probably gonna be a little bit messy, but it's just so that the video isn't too long. Okay. All right. Okay. Doesn't need to be perfect for this tutorial, but basically this is the result of the stamp tool. And I didn't do a great job because I didn't duplicate my layer, but we can see in the history panel, come back to the initial, the very original state of this picture, and we can see a massive difference. So that was before, this is now. So that's when the stamp tool beats the content aware fill. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find some more on 961.courses, and thanks for watching.